There was a morning when even the sun seemed tired of shining. No bird song, no distant city noise, only a suspended air, as if the world had paused to listen to itself. Lucca woke up before the alarm. There was no light, only a bluish-gray tone filling the room. For a moment, he thought he had woken too early. But the clock showed the usual time. It was the sun that hadn't come. Blue, curled up at the foot of the bed, opened his eyes slowly, sensing that something felt different. No rays crossed the cracks of the window, only the wind, walking softly on tiptoe. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed and just breathed quietly. It was a calm strangeness, not fear, but a feeling of pause. The world seemed to ask for silence, and he obeyed. For a second, he thought maybe the sun had grown tired too, that even light needed a day to rest, to gather its own glow and remember why it exists. Blue sighed, and the sound was enough to break the spell. Lucas smiled. There was something beautiful about that delay, something that whispered, without words. Not everything has to happen at the right time to be perfect. The dawn hadn't arrived yet, but inside him, something was already awakening. On the table, between his worn-out journal and the mug forgotten from the night before, there was a piece of paper. Lucca looked at it with surprise. He didn't remember leaving anything there. It was folded in half, simple, almost shy. There was something faintly luminous about it, as if the darkness itself had decided to spare it. He opened it slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might break the quiet magic of that moment. Only 3 lines were written, in a handwriting he somehow recognized but couldn't place. Today, the light arrives later. It's not absence, it's care. Learn to see in the dark. For a second, the silence seemed to breathe with him. Lucca read and reread the words, feeling each one settle inside him like leaves falling on still water. Blue lifted his head, curious, wagging his tail, as if he too understood the message without needing to read it. "It's not absence, it's care," he whispered, tasting the phrase like a new flavor. Maybe life was like that. Sometimes it turns off the lights just to teach us how to see with different eyes. Lucca placed the note between the pages of his journal, as if it were a message left by time itself. Outside, the sun still hadn't appeared, but inside him, a different kind of brightness was beginning to rise. Outside, the city seemed suspended between dream and awakening. The streets, always in a hurry, now rested in a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. The rooftops slept under a gray blanket, and the windows kept their eyes closed, as if no one wanted to be the first to interrupt that universal rest. Lucca watched from the window. There was something different in the air, a light heaviness, an ancient calm. The distant sound of footsteps, the murmur of leaves, Even the song of the birds, everything seemed to whisper instead of speak. It was as if the city had traded noise for prayer. Blue, curious, pushed his nose through the curtain. The wind smelled of wet earth and memories. Lucca watched him and thought, even the air seems to move slower today. Then he understood. The world wasn't still. It was breathing with him. The absence of the sun wasn't a punishment, but an invitation to listen. Every roof, every tree, every window murmured the same secret. Not everything that goes quiet dies. Some things just learn to speak more softly. And in that instant, the boy realized there was a kind of light that didn't come from the sky, a brightness that was born within every time the rush of life grew silent. Lucca leaned against the window and looked at the gray horizon. For a moment, he wondered if maybe the sun hadn't forgotten to rise. Maybe it just needed a day for itself. After all, even what lights the world can grow tired. He imagined the sun sitting on a cloud high above, silently watching the earth. Maybe it was thinking about all the mornings that had started too fast, about the days that shone without rest, about the people who rushed through life without ever looking at the sky. What if even the sun needed to breathe, he murmured. Blue, lying at his feet, lifted his head as if to agree. The little dog seemed to understand that even the brightest light needs to close its eyes sometimes. Lucca smiled. He thought of all the times he had pretended to be fine when deep down he just wanted to rest. Maybe the sun was a mirror, showing that even the grandest things need gentleness. Outside, the wind blew a little warmer, as if the night itself had heard and decided to embrace the idea. Lucca closed his eyes and felt calm expand inside him, as if a soft light, not from the day, but from understanding, was beginning to rise in his chest. Not every absence is a loss, he thought. Sometimes it's just life's way of teaching us to pause. The table still carried the scent of the night. The note remained there, calm and silent, as if waiting for its next line. Lucca opened his journal, the same one with the worn cover and folded corners, and ran his fingers over the pages, feeling the texture of old stories. Every word written, there had been an attempt to understand the world, and at that moment, the silence seemed to ask for one more. The pen rested beside him, cold and patient. He picked it up and began to write slowly, as if afraid to wake time itself. Not every pause is a loss. Not every delay is a mistake. Some arrivals need silence to be beautiful. The words came out with the lightness of a sigh. Blue lifted his head and watched him closely, as if following every stroke of the pen. Outside, the sky remained unchanged, but inside the room, something was moving, a discreet, almost invisible light. growing between one line and another, as if the very act of writing were lighting candles in the dark. Lucca paused for a moment and looked at what he had written. The letters seemed to breathe. He felt that maybe the sun was simply waiting for the right moment to read his words before rising. And there was comfort in that thought. With a small smile, he closed the journal and held it close to his chest. Blue came closer, resting his nose on the notebook. Two hearts beating in the same rhythm, the rhythm of patience. Outside, the city was still asleep, but inside that room, the morning was beginning to be written. Lucca kept looking at the closed journal, as if he were watching a newly planted seed. The sky outside was still gray, but inside him, something was moving. A light feeling, an invisible spark. He thought of the trees in his grandmother's backyard. He remembered helping her bury small seeds and then forgetting about them. They seemed dead beneath the dark soil, but weeks later, they would sprout, green, strong, alive. No seed sees the sun before it's born, he thought. It first learns to grow in the dark. Blue, lying beside him, yawned and stretched his paws, making a soft sound as his nails touched the floor. That small noise seemed to translate what Lucca felt. Life, even where everything still looked quiet. He began to write again, this time without hurry. There are dawns that begin inside us. Before they touch the sky, they rise in the heart. The words echoed in silence. And then he understood. The sun might be missing outside, but a hidden light was growing within him. Not a blinding flash, but a warm, human glow. The kind that doesn't burn, only warms. Blue moved closer and rested his head on Lucca's knee. Lucca gently stroked him, looking at the still dim horizon. The morning, perhaps, had already begun. It had just chosen to bloom from the inside out. The curtain moved with a soft breath, as if the night itself were still breathing inside the room. Lucca walked to the window and rested his forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the darkness felt alive, not threatening, but present, ancient, and wise. "I know," he whispered, not sure who he was speaking to. "Sometimes I forget to be born too." For a moment, he felt as if the wind were listening. The leaves outside replied with a soft rustle, a sound so gentle it felt like a caress. Blue lifted his head and looked toward the window, alert, as if he too had heard the same quiet murmur. Lucca smiled. There was something beautiful about speaking to the night, as if, by confessing his fragility, the world became lighter. He realized he wasn't asking for the sun to return, but only for the darkness to remain kind. Outside, the wind settled between the trees, like a friend sitting beside him in silence, not to answer but simply to stay. Lucca closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The darkness seemed to settle inside him too, not as absence, but as shelter. Blue pressed his nose gently against Lucca's leg, and that simple gesture was enough for everything to make sense. Some answers don't come in words. They come in the form of calm. The night, Lucca thought, isn't the end of the day, it's the pause the day needs to keep existing. When the clock marked the hour the sun was supposed to rise, Lucca was still by the window. The sky was thick and gray, like a heavy blanket. But then something changed. Not a flash, not a sudden break. Just a thread of light, so thin it could have been imagined by tired eyes. It was a golden line cutting across the horizon, so delicate, so quiet, that it felt more like a sigh than a ray of light. Blue noticed it first, his ears perked up, tail wagging, and he made a small sound, almost like a dog's laugh. Lucca followed his friend's gaze and saw it. It wasn't the whole sun, just its promise. But that was enough. Everything that had been asleep, the windows, the rooftops, the trees, seemed to stir, as if the entire world were taking a deep breath together. He felt his chest grow warm. It was as if the universe itself whispered, "See? The light never forgets the way. It only takes longer when it wants to arrive gently." Lucca stood there, watching that line of gold widen, becoming a thicker glow, then a soft streak spreading across the sky. And with every passing second, something inside him expanded too. Blue leaned against his leg, and together they stayed there, in silence, watching the day learn how to rise again. The first light didn't come to brighten everything. It came to remind him that hope always begins with a small glow. The shy gold on the horizon started to stretch, touching the clouds like someone waking the world with their fingertips. The light didn't rush, it walked, with the patience of something that understands the value of time. Lucca watched the sun rise as if he were witnessing a silent miracle. Nothing made a sound, yet everything felt alive. The houses seemed to wake one by one. First the windows, then the rooftops, and finally the streets, which filled with a faint, almost liquid light. Blue followed the movement of reflections on the floor, trying to chase that newborn sun with his eyes. Lucca smiled. The dog seemed to be playing with the light itself. Then he understood. The sun hadn't forgotten to rise. It had simply chosen to arrive at the rhythm of the heart, without haste, without spectacle, just being. And in that moment, everything made sense. Maybe the most beautiful things in the world aren't the ones that appear suddenly, but the ones that arrive slowly, like light, like peace, like love. The boy took a deep breath, feeling the warmth touch his face. It was a different kind of warmth, not from the body, but from the soul. Blue lay beside him, calm and peaceful. as if he knew that the duty of dawn had already been fulfilled. The day has been born, Lucca thought, not to light up the world, but to remind me to be born with it a little calmer, a little more whole. When the room finally filled with light, Lucca noticed that the silence was still there, not as absence, but as part of the brightness. It was a kind of calm that didn't need to explain anything, a peace that only comes after waiting. The sunlight slipped through the curtains in soft threads, painting small golden patches on the floor. Blu, now awake, shifted positions and rested his head on Lucca's legs. The warm touch of the dog anchored him to the present, as if to say, "We made it. You can rest now." Lucca opened his journal once more. The notes still held the words from the night, but something inside him asked for a new line. He wrote slowly, each letter steady and quiet. Some lights never go out. They just close their eyes so they can see better again. He stared at the words, letting time pass. There was no rush, no lack, only fullness. Outside, the sun was already high, and the city was gently returning to the rhythm of ordinary days. But inside that room, the dawn felt eternal. Lucca leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, listening to the soft sound of Blu's breathing. He felt part of something greater, invisible, as if the whole world were breathing with them. "Blu's already asleep," he murmured with a quiet smile. "You can rest too." And in that moment, the day, and everything that was being reborn within it, learned that true beginnings don't make noise. They simply happen as softly as the sun rising again after allowing itself to rest.